it's important to remember that families are all different. So we're looking at the idea of how we're going to maintain those family relationships. We want to look at a couple of areas to focus on. First, we're going to look at maintaining strategies for families, how we work with technology and family maintenance, and how we work with something called dialectics in relationship to family in particular. So our first topic is maintaining strategies for families, and there's a couple of different ones to look at. So we're going to look at positivity, assurances, and self-disclosure. So in the first one, positivity, this one suggests that you want to keep the communication between you and your family members upbeat and do favors for people where you're not necessarily saying, hey, I did this because of this particular thing. Just do it as a gift for your family members. Make encounters enjoyable. So avoid complaining so that you're not the wet rag in the family. I mean, sometimes you're going to have to, throw things in there, but for the most part, keeping conversations on the positive side are going to be a good thing. Avoid ridiculing the family members, avoid whining and sulking. Do things that are going to keep the relationship pleasant. So from positivity going into assurances. Assurances are letting your family know what they mean to you. Like, you're a very important person to me. You matter. Our relationship is unique and valuable. I'm committed to having this relationship with you in the long term. And I think, certainly in my situation, I have one older brother. I have some step siblings, but the one that I'm closest to is my older brother. And my mom used to say, when you guys are going to grow up, you're going to be best friends, because we fought. And we are. Now we are really good friends. So, the idea of what happens with your relationships can change over time, and the value of who those people are to you can certainly shift over time. So I certainly send messages to my brother and my father and let them know, that it matters, that I appreciate them. They're always helping me out, so I do what I can to let them know how much I appreciate their support in helping me. And avoid doing things, there are other elements to go along with this. So one of them is, so you want to make sure that you're doing things to avoid devaluing your family relationships in front of other people. You're doing things like, saying that somebody else's family is superior to your family. Not cool. Self-disclosure. So this would have to do with sharing private thoughts. And you want to avoid doing any kind of betrayal with your family, where someone might feel like like you gave away some of their secrets or you gave away some of their information. So really working to be consistent, trustworthy, ethical, making sure that you do what you can to talk to your family members and avoid betraying any confidences that they give you. And if you bring up something that may be challenging for you, avoid being defensive. Really see what you can do to be present for your family and really create that connection with them. So we look at technology, and I can tell you technology has definitely changed over time. There was, for us, in my home, there was just the telephone when I was a child. And initially, we didn't have message machines. Can't even remember what they're called. Message machines, we'll just call them. And we didn't have those. Initially, if you weren't home, you just didn't get your phone call. And things shifted, and you started getting messages, so at least you can listen to messages. So, if you were out, you can go back and check on your messages and be able to return phone calls to people. So that enabled us to have a little bit more connection with the phone, with our phone and technology. And cell phones changed it completely, because now your cell phone travels with you. And now people question you if you don't answer your cell phone. Like, you're supposed to be on top of it and answering it at all times. I know I can't do that. I'm either working with clients or I'm teaching classes, so it doesn't work for me to have to be tied to my phone and not have that and be disconnected. Sometimes you have to be disconnected for a little while. But I think now it really does allow people that are in different parts of the country to connect with each other. Fortunately for me, both my parents and my brother and I all stayed in the same area, and that we still are in the same area. Outside my mother, who's passed away, but everybody else is still close by as far as my immediate family. Now, my more extended family, including my aunts and uncles and cousins, of course, many of them are spread out across the United States and some outside of the country. So the idea of having online and face-to-face communication certainly allows for those things to shift. I think email has changed things. I think working with something like Skype and having access to face-to-face communication via the technology, again, has shifted it to another level where we really do have more of an opportunity to connect with each other. And the suggestion is that it's more complementary rather than being a substitute. It is in addition to. So really giving people more of an opportunity to connect in a different way. And I can tell you my mother was a big texter. She liked to text. My father doesn't want to have anything to do with it. He doesn't want to learn it. He doesn't want to mess with it. And he's a pretty technologically advanced fella, but he really doesn't want to have anything to do with technology. It's just, at least texting. So that's just not something that he particularly enjoys. So I think that it has increased our communication. And the textbook suggests, if you have more connection and the higher level of connection you have with families, that does have a tendency to boost intimacy and satisfaction. So technology really has given an opportunity to create more of a connection between people. I think one other thing that happens with it too is it does give us an opportunity to communicate sometimes when it's more convenient for us. So if it's an email that's been sent to you, then you can kind of rest with that email and not worry about it for a little bit, and then be able to go back and check it later and deal with it at a time that's more convenient for you. All right, so dialectics. So I had to look this one up. We did talk about this a little bit under the conflict chapter, but I really kind of wanted to see how it was defined in the outside. And I asked Siri, and Siri came up with this being a method for resolving disagreements. Now, in looking at the way that we're talking about it here, when we're talking about relational dialectics, they're kind of competing impulses. So we look at things on a continuum oftentimes, and in this case, we're going to look at two. We're going to look at autonomy versus a connection and openness versus protection. So they kind of hang out on two ends of the continuum, and we're looking at, at these as sort of ones that show up more commonly in families. So let's look at autonomy versus connection. So you kind of, as you're growing up, sometimes there's a desire to have a separate identity from the family. You want to enjoy the connection you get with your family, but maybe you want to see yourself as distinct. And I think sometimes you become your family name. If you have siblings that went through school before you, there's expectations that teachers might have based on how your brother or sister performed before you, or if you're the first one, what happens to your siblings after you. So there's sometimes expectations set by your family, and you may not feel like you're separate. You may not feel like you're autonomous or distinct from the rest of your family. So you end up being associated with that. I think if you have a famous family, that may be a characteristic. Maybe if your family name suggests a particular like ethnicity, that might be another issue that you might run into if you have a name that's kind of distinct to your of a family group. That might cause you to feel like you're not separate. So this idea of kind of breaking free and creating your own selfhood becomes kind of important. And this might happen with children as they're starting to grow up. Maybe they want to assert their independence from their family and be distinct and be separate from them. So peers kind of start to replace family and start having a lot more influence over who you are. And then you stop being as connected to the family, because when you're a child, that's probably the primary one that most children have, is their family growing up. And certainly one of the first ones that you might have growing up. So you kind of want to, as you get older, sort of balance this out with outside sources, like, friends. So if there's things that you need to do in your world, rather than just relying only on your family, having other people outside that help you and support you in some of the things that maybe your family did when you were younger. So that's just a way to help maybe you build that autonomy. And look at your family networks and see if your families is your only connection. Like if you only have your family as your connection, then maybe look at building some of those relationships outside of that, again, to sort of balance out that element. So the next one we're going to look at is openness and protection. As far as the two dialectics that we're going to discuss here, and the book mentions the communication privacy management theory. And this relates to how we create kind of boundaries about what's okay and what's not okay to share and reveal to people. And these boundaries are going to shift based on circumstances, based on the type of information that we're working with and how safe you might feel in that context and sharing that information. So families have privacy rules and how that kind of information is going to happen. So they determine things like what is discussed and who should have access to that information. We also look at how the information is discussed. So families have rules, families have parameters about how that's going to be done and how information might be discussed. So if you come from a more traditional family, there's the belief that children should be seen and not heard. You might hear that, so you're not really allowed to have an opinion. Or again, another family might really encourage conversation and people to have their own independent ideas and really think freely. The textbook mentions this idea of helicopter parents. I think this is an interesting one. It was a term I hadn't heard before until we were talking about it one day in class, in a different class. And there was a student that mentioned a parent that would do everything with their child. They would go to school with their child and be the homeroom teacher in the child's classroom. The parent would be present with them, pick them up from school, and be present with them all the time, be going to all the teacher events. And one of the things that happened was that the child really had a hard time developing her own autonomy. She really had a hard time understanding who she was, independent of her mother. And so as time went by, the other students were seeing kind of what was happening with her, and she went off to college and didn't make it. I mean, she couldn't survive because her mom hadn't taught her to be independent. I think that's one of our jobs as parents, is to teach our children to be independent, to teach them to think for themselves, to teach them self-management, and how do you take care of your own needs and be independent. So sometimes I think you run into these challenges with parents that, maybe were a little bit too involved in their kids' life and the kids didn't get a chance to really learn who they were. One area that this shows up is when kids go away to college. Sometimes they become really involved in partying on campus because they never had to moderate or modulate their own behavior at home. Now they're given total freedom. They really don't know how to handle it. So they go a little crazy. They do too much partying. They don't really balance that out with students and studies because they never had to do it because their parent always did that for them. I think that's an important element just to keep in mind. I think if your job is to keep your kids safe, I mean, that's one thing, but you have to teach them how to operate on their own without somebody watching over them and doing everything for them. They have to learn how to self-manage their own behavior. So the book mentions also, how might we fix these? How do you improve these? Families have different rules, so you want to recognize that there's different rules. You want to be respectful, and you want to know that this sort of shift happens over time. Another idea mentioned here is finding one other family member that has similar ideas to you and sort of matching up with those. So making sure that there's sort of an agreement between everybody, and making sure that you have, say, hey, we want to change maybe the way our parents talk about sex in the household. So if we want to change that, maybe you work with one other person in the family and you get agreement. Hey, we want this to be changed in the family. And then maybe you add a third person. But don't try to shove things down people's throat. Don't try to force it. Don't try to make things move quicker than they're going to move naturally, because there's going to be kind of a little bit of rebellion. And that's kind of the way the families operate. So keep in mind and be respectful of your family. Know that those things have developed over time. And as you go forward and you create your own families, whatever they look like, in your future, then you get to decide what those rules are going to be. And maybe you create a little bit more open parameters about what that looks like going forward. There you go. Thank you.